The sovereign mind, social surgery, and the mechanics of power. You are not here to find consolation. You are here because your faith in justice and humanity has made you vulnerable. While you basked in the rays of illusory security, those who understand the true mechanics of the world were sharpening their knives. The world is neither good nor evil. It is hierarchical. This is a biological axiom. Look at your hands. If, in moments of conflict, they begin to tremble, if your voice falters and your heartbeat steals your ability to think, you are not a sensitive person. You are a malfunctioning biological algorithm. Your limbic system controls you like a puppet, forcing you to surrender resources, territory, and dignity to those who have learned to suppress the will of others with a single glance. In this investigation, we will not speak of positive thinking or spiritual growth. Those are empty calories for the weak. We shall engage in social surgery. I invite you into the operating room, where we shall dissect 5 destinies. We will see how Arthur suffocated from his own thirst for approval, how Eleanor allowed her memory to be erased for the sake of another person's power, how Julian bargained with himself in deathly silence, how Victoria turned her weakness into poison, and finally, how the sovereign mind is born, a state in which you cease to be prey. We will pass through the neurochemistry of fear, the ethology of dominance, and the icy pragmatics of survival. I will destroy your illusion of security, so that upon its ruins you may erect a fortress that cannot be taken by storm. Warning: if you are seeking sympathy, close this page. There are no victims here. There are only mistakes. And now, we shall begin to correct them. Chapter 1. The effect of imaginary security. The trap of social approval. The confrontation phase. Narrative. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of a city skyscraper is flooded with cold morning light. The glass walls created an illusion of openness. But for Arthur, it was a display window where he was being put up for sale. Opposite him, in a chair made of black leather, sat Mr. Sterling. Sterling did not move for 2 minutes. He simply stared at Arthur, maintaining eye contact with the intensity of a predator that has already chosen the point of the bite. "Your numbers, Arthur." Sterling paused, intentionally prolonging it. He is waiting for me to start making excuses. My pulse is already at 110. I feel my armpits becoming damp. Why is he silent? Have I made a mistake in the merger calculations? I must say something to diffuse this pressure. Any word at all. Arthur felt his face stretch automatically into a slight, ingratiating smile. It was an automatic gesture, an attempt to show that he was one of them, that he posed no threat. I can explain the methodology if there are questions regarding volatility. Arthur's voice sounded half a tone higher than usual. He heard that treacherous quiver and cursed himself. Sterling tilted his head slightly. His left eyebrow rose barely perceptibly. "Explain. Do you think I need explanations?" He is mocking me. He is using my fussiness against me. Every second of my babbling only confirms his superiority. I look like a schoolboy who has not learned his lesson, even though I have 10 years in M&A behind me. Arthur began to speak faster. He showered him with terms, charts, mentioned alpha and beta coefficients, trying to fill the black hole of Sterling's silence with the sounds of his voice. The more he spoke, the more relaxed Sterling became. He leaned back in his chair, exposing his neck and spreading his arms wide. Biological markers of absolute confidence. 2. The psychological X-ray analysis. What do we see under the scalpel? Arthur has become a victim of cognitive suppression through an information vacuum. Attack mechanism. Sterling's silence is not an absence of action. It is an active weapon. In the social hierarchy, the one who controls silence controls reality. Arthur's brain interprets the dominant silence as a signal of mortal threat, social death. Neurochemistry of fear. Arthur's amygdala sends out distress signals. Cortisol is injected into the blood. This blocks the prefrontal cortex, the zone responsible for logic and strategy. Arthur shifts into fight or flight mode. But since there is nowhere to run, he chooses the third and most destructive reaction: social accommodation. Terminology. Fear grin. Biologically, this is a grimace of submission that primates use to avoid the aggression of the leader. Arthur is not smiling because he is happy. He smiles because his instincts are screaming, "Please do not cast me out of the troop." Gaslighting through silence. Sterling did not say the report was bad. He forced Arthur to reach that conclusion himself by projecting his fears onto the void. 3. The psychological precedent. Real-world example. Recall the experiment of Solomon Asch, 1951. A subject was asked to compare the length of lines on cards. It was an elementary task. But when all other participants, undercover actors, unanimously chose an obviously incorrect option, 75% of subjects agreed with the absurdity at least once. Why? The fear of social alienation is stronger than logic. Arthur is currently in Asch's room. Sterling is his pressure group. Arthur is ready to admit his correct calculations are erroneous simply so that Sterling might nod and return to him the feeling of security. This is a biological betrayal of one's own mind for the sake of survival in a hierarchy. 4. The counterstrike, the lesson. Arthur should have realized. At that moment, Sterling was not analyzing the report. Sterling was analyzing Arthur. Lesson number 1. The one who first breaks the silence admits to being a subordinate. To seize the initiative, Arthur should have 1. Accepted the pause as an ally. If Sterling is silent, Arthur must remain silent in return. Looking directly at the bridge of the opponent's nose, this is less aggressive than a direct stare into the pupils, but it creates pressure. 2. Decrease the pace. If it is necessary to speak, the voice must be an octave lower. Slow speech is a sign of high testosterone and control over the environment. 3. Used space capture. Instead of shrinking, one must occupy more space. Place hands on the table, broaden the shoulders. Hard rule. Never justify yourself unless you have been asked to do so. Justification is an admission of guilt before the verdict has been delivered. 5. Sensory immersion. The office smells of ozone from the operating equipment and a faint scent of sandalwood from Sterling's perfume. The air feels thick, like jelly. Arthur hears the hum of blood in his ears. A rhythmic, intrusive thumping. Every second of silence feels like a whip strike across exposed nerves. The surface of the polished stone table cools his palms, reminding him that in this world, only those whose blood temperature matches the temperature of the environment survive. If you recognize yourself or your past reactions in the patterns or behaviors described, please leave a like in the comments. This isn't a sign of weakness, but the first sign that your brain has begun the process of deconstructing old habits. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Gaslighting. The Destruction of Reality 1. The Confrontation Phase, Narrative. The office of the Vanguard Creative Agency resembled a sterile aquarium. Glass, white concrete, and the muffled hum of servers. Eleanor stood by the projector, clutching a remote control in her hand. She had spent 2 weeks developing a brand concept for an oil giant. Every detail had been verified. At the end of the long table sat Dr. Thorne, the executive director, whose reputation as a mentor was merely camouflage for his sadism. "Eleanor, this is curious." Thorne slowly flipped through the slides on his tablet. "But why did you ignore my key requirement regarding neon minimalism?" Eleanor froze. In her brain, a memory flashed of the briefing last Thursday. "But Dr. Thorne, you said yourself that neon is a cheap trick from the 80s. You asked for earthy tones and classical typography. I even have notes." Thorne laughed softly. It was a dry, lifeless sound. He turned to the other employees sitting along the table. "Colleagues, did you hear that?" Internal monologue. "I am isolating her now. I will force them to become my accomplices, even if they know I am lying. Fear for their positions will force them to remain silent." "Eleanor." Thorne lowered his voice to a paternal, almost sympathetic tone. "Perhaps you were once again too preoccupied with your telephone or—" He made a meaningful pause. "Is your personal situation with the divorce beginning to take a toll on your memory? We all here clearly remember the discussion about neon. Mark, confirm it." Mark, who was sitting nearby, looked away. "Yes, Eleanor." "It seems the talk was indeed about neon," he muttered, examining his fingernails. Subtext: "I am sorry, but Thorne is my god, and you are simply a disposable resource." Eleanor felt the room begin to swim. Inside her, a fierce argument began between her memory. "I remember his words exactly," and social pressure. "If everyone says otherwise, it means I'm losing my mind." She felt nausea, a physical reaction to the betrayal of reality. 2. The psychological X-ray analysis. We are observing classic gaslighting, amplified by triangulation. Attack mechanism: Thorne is not simply lying. He is attacking the foundation of Eleanor's personality, her trust in her own memory. When a person ceases to believe their own memories, they become like clay. One can impose any guilt, any debt, any order upon them. Triangulation: the use of a third party, Mark, to confirm the lie. This creates a consensus effect. Eleanor's brain interprets this as, the world is against my version of reality. The world is right, I am not. Physiology of pain. When a person is publicly portrayed as inadequate, the anterior cingulate cortex of the brain is activated. This same zone processes physical pain. Eleanor is currently experiencing the same sensation as if Thorne were pressing a lit cigarette against her hand. But because there are no visible wounds, her psyche seeks a way to end the pain through capitulation. Fine, perhaps I really was mistaken. Neurochemistry. The chronic release of cortisol in such situations destroys neural connections in the hippocampus, the center of memory. The irony is that gaslighting physically worsens the victim's memory, making subsequent attacks even more effective. 3. The psychological precedent, real-world example. Let us turn to the research of Elizabeth Loftus, a professor of psychology and an expert on the misinformation effect. In her experiments, she proved that it is enough to plant a few false details in a question. For example, how fast was the car going when it passed the stop sign, even though there was no sign, for a person to remember a non-existent object? Loftus showed that memory is not a video recording, but a Wikipedia page that can be edited by any manipulator possessing authority. Thorne is doing exactly this. He is editing Eleanor's page right in her presence, taking advantage of her state of shock. 4. The counter-strike, the lesson. Eleanor lost the moment she began to argue based on her memory against his word. In the world of predators, a word means nothing. Lesson number 2. Fix reality on external media. Do not argue, present the protocol. To destroy Thorne's attack, Eleanor should have 1. Created a paper trail. After every meeting, a follow-up email. According to your instruction from May 14th, we are moving away from neon toward earthy tones. Please confirm receipt. 2. The gray rock technique. When Thorne began the attack, she should not have justified herself. I was not on the phone. That is fuel for his dominance. The response must be dry. An interesting observation. Let us check the audio recording of the briefing or my entries in the CRM. 3. Radical pragmatism. As soon as a manipulator sees that you are not reacting emotionally but are technically recording his lie, he switches to an easier victim. He needs your confusion, not your efficiency. Hard rule. If a discussion has not been recorded in writing, it did not exist. If a manipulator denies the obvious, do not try to convince him. Instead, make his lie expensive for his reputation. 5. Sensory immersion. The light of the LED lamps in the office seems unbearably white, burning out the shadows. Eleanor feels the smell of antiseptic and expensive plastic, the smell of an operating room where her mind is being dissected. Thorne's voice sounds as if through a layer of cotton wool. She looks at her hands and sees that they are trembling slightly. This is not fear. This is a system failure, the brain's attempt to hold on to a vanishing truth. At this moment, she realizes, in this room, there is no air for the weak, only the cold vacuum of calculation. Chapter 3. Silence as a weapon of dominance. The vacuum of control 1. The confrontation phase. Narrative. The meeting room in a mansion on the outskirts of London was permeated with the scent of old wood and cognac. Julian, a young and ambitious founder of a tech startup, sat opposite Miller, a man who consumed companies as easily as others consume breakfast. Julian had just finished his brilliant presentation. He had laid all his cards on the table: growth figures, forecasts, technological innovations. He expected questions, criticism, or at least a dry no. But Miller was silent. 10 seconds passed. Miller simply looked at Julian, his fingers folded in a steeple gesture. He did not nod. He did not frown. His face was an absolutely motionless mask. Julian's internal monologue. Why is he silent? Did I miss something? Perhaps he already knows about the bug in the code? Or is the price too high? I need to add something. If I do not correct the situation now, the deal will fall through. 30 seconds passed. The silence became so thick that Julian began to hear the rhythmic ticking of his own wristwatch. His hand involuntarily reached for the glass of water. The ice in the glass clinked too loudly. This sound seemed like thunder to Julian, betraying his nervousness. You know, Mr. Miller, Julian began, his voice wavering. We are also considering the possibility of exclusive licensing rights if the question is about... He began to lower the price, himself, without a single word from the opponent. Miller smiled barely perceptibly at the corners of his lips. He had caught the fish without even casting the line. 2. The psychological X-ray analysis. Miller applied one of the cruelest techniques, inducing social deprivation in microdoses. The social mirror mechanism. The human brain is an organ tuned to the constant reception of feedback. We evolved in groups where a lack of reaction from fellow tribesmen meant exile, and exile meant death. When Julian receives no response, his brain interprets this as a system error. Projective identification. In conditions of an information vacuum, a person begins to fill the void with their own fears. Julian is not fighting Miller. He is fighting his own insecurity, which Miller simply highlighted with his silence. Neurochemistry. The absence of a predictable reaction causes a sharp drop in dopamine levels and a spike in norepinephrine. The organism enters a state of hypervigilance. The prefrontal cortex, logic, shuts down, giving way to the limbic system, instincts. Julian begins to speak only to restore social homeostasis. That is, to regain a sense of control through noise. San. The psychological precedent. Real-world example. In the 1970s, psychologist Edward Tronick conducted a famous experiment called the still face experiment. A mother first actively plays with an infant and then, on cue, makes her face absolutely expressionless for 2 minutes. The child's reaction is horrifying. First, he tries to attract attention with a smile, then he begins to scream, and finally, he falls into a state of the deepest stress and despair. An important lesson: we are grown-up children. When Miller makes a still face, he activates in Julian that same archaic terror of an abandoned infant. Miller turns an adult businessman into a defenseless creature that is ready for any concessions, just so that the mother, the authority figure, might smile again or at least show a sign of life. 4. The counterstrike, the lesson. Julian made a fundamental mistake. He viewed silence as a void that must be filled. In reality, silence in negotiations is a space of power. Lesson number 3. Your silence must be heavier than the silence of the enemy. To seize the initiative, Julian should have 1. The internal metronome. Technique. When silence falls, begin to count the seconds to yourself. Perceive this not as awkwardness, but as an exercise in endurance. Say to yourself, I will not speak first, even if we sit like this until tomorrow. 2. Visual anchor. Focus on your breathing. Make it deep and slow. This will signal to your brain that you are safe. When your body is relaxed, the manipulator cannot read your panic. 3. Return the ball. If the silence lasts for more than 60 seconds, use a short, neutral question. I see you are considering the figures. On which point shall we dwell in more detail? This returns the obligation to speak to the opponent without revealing your cards. Hard rule: never bargain with yourself. If you have made an offer and there is silence in response, wait. If you speak first, you will begin to lower your own price, or uisu, sensory immersion. In Miller's room, it was too quiet. Julian heard the grandfather clock ticking in the corner, a heavy, pendulous sound, like the blows of an axe against wood. The air smelled of cold coffee and dust from old books. Every movement of Miller, even if he simply moved a pen, seemed significant and threatening to Julian. The light from the desk lamp fell such that Miller's eyes remained in shadow, turning him into a faceless judge. This was the atmosphere of purgatory, where the only way out was the admission of one's weakness. Chapter 4. False vulnerability. The art of the poisoned bait 1. The confrontation phase. Narrative. The dining room of the Gilded Cage restaurant was filled with the clinking of crystal and the muffled murmur of the legal world's elite. Victoria, a leading lawyer in corporate disputes, sat at a table with Bennett, a colleague who had been methodically trying to displace her from a key case for the last 3 months. Victoria looked tired. Her shoulders were slightly slumped. She turned a glass of Chardonnay in her hands, staring into it as if she were looking for answers there. "You know, Bennett," she said quietly without looking at him, "sometimes I think this General Tech case will simply crush me. I have not slept for 3 days. Those documents, there are loopholes there that I simply do not have the strength to close." Internal monologue. "Swallow it, Bennett. I am giving you exactly what you want to see. My capitulation. Your brain is now bathing in dopamine from the anticipation of an easy victory." Bennett leaned forward. His pupils dilated, a biological marker of a hunter's excitement. He tried to hide a triumphant smile behind a mask of sympathy. "Victoria, we are all human. Perhaps you should transfer part of the archives to me? I could back you up before the firm's partners so that you do not look incompetent." "Perhaps you are right," Victoria whispered. "I will send you access to Critical Archive B tomorrow morning. Everything I am confused about is there." The next morning, Bennett, without losing a second, burst into the managing partner's office with an analytical report based on the data from that archive, seeking to prove that Victoria had made a fatal error. He did not know that Archive B was a masterfully constructed piece of disinformation. He had led himself to the executioner's block, voluntarily putting his head into the noose. 2. The psychological X-ray analysis. Victoria applied the technique of controlled information asymmetry. She did not defend herself against Bennett. She managed his aggression. Confirmation bias mechanism. Bennett already considered Victoria to be weaker than himself. When she gave him proof of this weakness, his brain stopped verifying the information. We tend to believe in what fits into our picture of the world. For Bennett, a reality where Victoria surrenders was too sweet to be questioned. Neurochemistry of triumph. When Bennett heard about her failure, his reward system, mesolimbic pathway, released a massive dose of dopamine. This created a tunnel vision effect. In a state of euphoria from a near victory, critical thinking shuts down. Bennett ceased to be an analyst and became a victim of his own pride. Terminology: false vulnerability. This is the creation of a zone of apparent weakness that is actually the most fortified position. Victoria did not open up to him. She created the illusion of an open door, behind which lay an abyss. 3. The psychological precedent, real-world example. In psychology, this resonates with the role obedience effect, vividly demonstrated in Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. When ordinary students were given the role of guards, they began to behave aggressively and overconfidently simply because their status demanded it. Bennett fell into the trap of the dominant role. As soon as Victoria occupied the position of the victim, Bennett automatically switched to the pattern of an aggressor. He ceased to see her as a living human being with strategic thinking. He saw only a resource that could be consumed. His role blinded him, making his behavior 100% predictable. 4. The counterstrike, the lesson. Victoria used the Nietzschean will to power, but wrapped it in the shroud of weakness. She realized that direct confrontation with Bennett was costly, whereas the manipulation of his expectations was free. Lesson number 4. Show a wound where you have armor. Your true strength must be invisible. To use this method, you must 1. Understand the hunger of the opponent. What does he want from you most of all? Your fear, your mistake, your dismissal? Give him an imitation of that. 2. Feed the disinformation. Your weakness must look logical. If you have always been strong, sudden tears will be suspicious. Fatigue, personal problems, lack of experience in a specific issue. These are ideal baits. 3. Wait for the moment of maximum exposure. The manipulator must bring your mistake into the public eye, as Bennett did with the partner. At that moment, his reputation becomes tied to that lie. When you present the real facts, he is definitively destroyed because he has discredited himself. Hard rule: never use false vulnerability unless you control the situation 100%. This is an all-in game. 5. Sensory immersion. The air in the restaurant was heavy, saturated with the smells of roasted meat, expensive perfume, and aged tobacco. Victoria felt how the cold glass of wine cooled her fingers, while a cold machine of calculation worked inside her. Bennett's face in the candlelight seemed grotesque. His eyes glistened with greed, and his smile was like a tear in the fabric of reality. She saw how he swallowed every word of hers, and this process reminded her of a documentary film about deep-sea predators that blindly swim toward the light of a lure, not noticing the jaws behind it. Chapter 5. The Sovereign Mind. The Will to Power 1. The Confrontation Phase. Narrative. The glass cube of the office on the top floor seemed suspended in the void of the nocturnal metropolis. Inside, it was stifling from unspoken aggression. Arthur, Eleanor, Julian, and Victoria. They were all here now, but not as separate people, but as projections of the same battle. Facing them stood the council. 5 investors whose faces in the twilight resembled masks carved from granite. The leader among them, Dominic, struck the table with his palm. The sound was dry, like a gunshot. Your strategy is an arrogant bluff. You have crossed the line. We are annulling the contracts. You will be left with nothing. No reputation, no assets, no future. Dominic fell silent, expecting an explosion. He waited for anger, excuses, or pleas. He looked at Arthur, searching in his eyes for that same fear grin he had seen before. Internal monologue. He wants my reaction. He feeds on my adrenaline. If I flinch now, I will confirm his power. But I am no longer a biological machine reacting to stimuli. I am an observer. Arthur did not look away. He did not smile. He did not even change his posture. He allowed Dominic's silence to flow past him, like water past a stone. Are you finished? Arthur's voice was devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of an operating system reporting an error. Your attempt at intimidation is based on the false premise that I need your approval. Subtext. Your threats are merely vibrations of the air. My value is not in your hands. Dominic felt his confidence crack. He had encountered something that could not be calculated. A person who had voluntarily renounced social security. 2. The psychological X-ray. Analysis. Here, we see the achievement of the state of radical sovereignty. Mechanism of cognitive disidentification. Arthur no longer identifies himself with his social role or his self that can be offended. He has moved his consciousness into the position of an external observer. Neurochemistry of freedom. In an ordinary situation, a threat to status causes a storm in the limbic system. But Arthur has trained the vagal brake, the ability of the vagus nerve to instantly calm the heartbeat. His parasympathetic nervous system suppresses the sympathetic one. While Dominic seethes with rage, high cortisol, and norepinephrine, Arthur remains in a state of low pulse and high concentration. Terminology: apathy as a higher strategy. This is not a depressive indifference, but a selective management of attention. Arthur deprives Dominic of his main resource, an emotional response. Without a response, any manipulation suffocates, like a fire without oxygen. 3. The psychological precedent, real-world example. The foundation of this state is the work of Martin Seligman on the theory of learned helplessness. In his experiments, dogs that received electric shocks in a cage from which they could not escape later refused to leave even an open cage. They grew accustomed to being victims. Most people are Seligman's dogs. They are used to the world, bosses, partners, society, striking them with social electricity, and they simply shrink. But there exists an antipode, learned optimism, or, in our harsh context, learned sovereignty. This is the realization that the cage of social expectations is merely an illusion. Arthur destroyed his learned helplessness. He understood that Dominic cannot cause him harm if Arthur himself does not give permission for it through his reaction. 4. The counterstrike, the lesson. Arthur seized control of reality not through force, but through the absence of dependence. Lesson number 5. Power is not control over others. Power is the complete absence of others' control over you. To attain the sovereign mind, you must implement the following rules. 1. Deconstruction of provocation. In the moment of an attack, ask yourself, what emotion are they trying to squeeze out of me right now? As soon as you have named the emotion, fear, guilt, shame, you separate it from yourself. You do not feel fear. You observe the attempt to evoke fear. 2. The aesthetic of coldness. Train your brain to receive dopamine not from compliments, but from your own imperturbability. Your calmness in a moment of crisis is your personal currency. The more expensive it is, the richer you are. 3. Will to power, according to Nietzsche. This is the striving for self-overcoming. You must be ready to destroy your current life if it has become an instrument of another's control. Freedom is expensive, but slavery costs even more. Hard rule. If you can be affected, you can be managed. Become smooth, like a mirror. Let their aggression reflect back onto them without leaving a single scratch on you. 5. Sensory immersion. Arthur looked through the panoramic window. The city lights below resembled a microcircuit, where millions of people bits scurried along set algorithms, driven by fear and greed. The air in the office became cool. Arthur physically felt his separation from the people at the table. They seemed to him like characters in an old, silent film. A lot of fuss, a lot of makeup, but no substance. He felt a ringing, icy void inside himself. This was not the void of loneliness, but the void of pure space, where there was no longer any room for foreign voices. He was free. He was a force. Conclusion. You did not simply watch these 5 chapters. You were present at the autopsy of your own vulnerability. The screen goes dark, but what has been seen cannot be unseen. We have extracted the foreign bodies, your fears, social dogmas, and infantile need for love, and left in their place a cold, pulsating clarity. What unfolded before your eyes was not just the stories of Arthur, Eleanor, Julian, and Victoria. These were mirrors. Now these characters are not people on a screen, but your new neural patterns, your tools, your ways of responding to the pressure of the environment. The world outside this text has remained the same. Tomorrow, someone will again try to use your silence against you. Someone will try to rewrite your memory or feed you a sense of guilt. But now they have a fundamental problem. That problem is you. Your gaze has become heavier. Your breathing is steadier. You have understood the main secret of social alchemy. The one who needs nothing owns everything. Final psychological X-ray. Remember what you saw under the microscope. Emotion is a signal of loss of control. If you feel resentment, it means you have allowed the enemy to dictate your value. Justice is a consolation prize for those who are unable to take what is theirs by the force of intellect. Morality is the software that predators install on the hardware of the herd so that it does not resist during the hunt. Your prefrontal cortex is henceforth your supreme commander-in-chief. The limbic system is a tamed beast on a short leash. You have exited the food chain not because you have become kinder, but because you have become too expensive, complex, and dangerous a resource for any social parasite. The freedom you have just realized has the metallic aftertaste of loneliness. When you cease to react to provocations, you become an alien to a society that lives off emotional dramas. Но это единственная цена, которую стоит платить за право быть суверенным. But this is the only price worth paying for the right to be a sovereign. Neuroplasticity is your ally. Every time you choose cold calculation over impulsive anger, you are physically rebuilding your brain. You are erasing the slave and recording the master. Go and practice. Be the mirror. Be the silence. Be the ice that does not melt even in the very epicenter of social hell. The psychological investigation is closed. You are no longer a resource. You are the operator of the system. Understanding the mechanisms of the psyche is your greatest freedom. Subscribe to explore the hidden facets of human behavior together. And be sure to comment on what psychological pattern or strategy we'll explore next. Let's seek the truth together.